If you told me a year ago that my marriage would implode on a random Wednesday night, I wouldn't have believed you. But there I was, sitting in the dark in our driveway, my hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at the glow of the porch light like it was some kind of spotlight on a stage I wasn't ready to step onto. The day had been uneventful, the kind that slides by unnoticed. Work was busy but manageable, and I'd stopped at the grocery store on the way home to pick up a bottle of her favorite wine, Cabernet Sauvignon, the one she always claimed made her feel fancy. When I walked through the door, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Nicole wasn't in the kitchen, where she usually waited for me with a half-hearted smile and a complaint about her day. Instead, her purse was on the counter, her shoes haphazardly kicked off by the door, and a half-empty glass of wine sat on the coffee table in the living room. I called her name, but there was no answer. That's when I noticed her phone. It was lying face down on the couch, a rarity for Nicole. She was glued to that thing. Social media, texts, Pinterest boards full of things she'd never actually cook or make. I picked it up without thinking, intending to move it out of the way, but the screen lit up with a notification. A message from someone named Ryan. "Miss you already." I froze. It was like the room tilted slightly, just enough to throw off my balance. For a moment, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a coworker, a friend, a joke I didn't understand. But my gut told me otherwise. The door to the bathroom opened, and Nicole walked out, her hair damp from the shower, wrapped in the same robe she'd had since college. She stopped when she saw me holding her phone, her expression flickering for just a second before she pasted on a smile. "What are you doing?" she asked, her tone light but tight around the edges. "Just moving this," I said, placing it back on the couch. Her eyes lingered on me for a moment too long before she picked up the glass of wine and took a sip. She didn't ask me about my day, didn't thank me for the wine I'd brought. Instead, she sat down on the couch, scrolling through her phone as if I wasn't even there. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed the moment in my head over and over again, dissecting every detail of her reaction. The way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. The way her tone was just a little too forced. Nicole had always been good at twisting the truth into something prettier, something easier to swallow. But this felt different. Something was wrong, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into a storm I hadn't seen coming. The next day, I did something I never thought I'd do. I logged into her email. We'd shared the password years ago, back when we first got married and thought transparency was the cornerstone of a good relationship. I scrolled past work emails, promotional spam, and forwarded memes from her mom until I found it. A thread with Ryan. His emails weren't long, but they were personal. "You looked so beautiful last night. I can't stop thinking about you." I read it twice, my hands trembling. Beautiful last night. She told me she had dinner with a friend from work. That evening, Nicole came home later than usual. She was chipper, her laughter a little too loud, her cheeks flushed in a way that wasn't from the cold. I asked her how her day was, and she launched into a story about a meeting that ran late, about how work was crazy, about how we should book a vacation soon because she needed a break. Her words flowed easily, but I wasn't listening. All I could hear was the echo of Ryan's email in my head. "Beautiful last night." I nodded along, my stomach churning with a mix of anger and disbelief. Nicole thought she was untouchable. She thought I wouldn't notice. But she was wrong. The morning after I found Ryan's email, I sat in the kitchen with my coffee, staring at the steam curling up from the mug like it held answers I couldn't find. Nicole was still asleep upstairs, her soft snores filtering down the hallway. I'd always trusted her. Maybe too much. That email wasn't just a betrayal. It was a crack in the foundation of everything we'd built. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. If Nicole had decided to turn our marriage into a game, I needed to learn the rules before I could play. While she was in the shower, I opened her laptop. I'd seen her use it to check emails and shop online, but I never paid much attention. Now I was looking at it like it held the missing pieces of a puzzle. Her browser history was clean, too clean. She wasn't tech-savvy enough to clear it regularly, so the emptiness was telling. I dug through her files next, scrolling past photos and work documents until I found a folder labeled Receipts. It wasn't anything incriminating at first. A few orders from her favorite clothing stores, a confirmation for a restaurant we'd been to together. Then I saw it. A booking confirmation for a hotel downtown, dated 2 nights ago. She'd told me she had dinner with her friend that night. I closed the laptop as I heard the water shut off upstairs. My heart pounded in my chest, but I kept my expression neutral when she walked into the kitchen, her hair still wet. Over breakfast, Nicole was her usual self, scrolling through her phone and laughing at something she wouldn't show me. She asked if I could pick up some groceries on my way home from work, then made an offhand comment about a new coworker who was so exhausting to deal with. I nodded, biting back the urge to ask if this exhausting coworker's name was Ryan. Nicole thought I was clueless, but I wasn't. That night, while she was out meeting Amanda for drinks, I attached a GPS tracker to her car. It was a small, sleek device I'd ordered online that synced to an app on my phone. The setup was quick, and I tested it twice to make sure it was working. When she left, I watched the app as her car headed toward downtown. Not to the wine bar she always raved about. To the same hotel from the booking confirmation. I drove there, parking across the street where I had a clear view of the entrance. Her car was already in the lot. A few minutes later, she walked out with a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, well-dressed, with an easy confidence that made my blood boil. They were laughing, her hand brushing his arm as they walked toward the hotel entrance. I took a photo with my phone, my hands shaking. Nicole didn't even glance around as they disappeared inside. When she came home later that night, she was glowing. Her smile was wide, her laughter soft, as if she hadn't just ripped the rug out from under me. I asked her how Amanda was, my voice steady. "Great," she said, pulling off her heels. "We laughed so much. I really needed that." I nodded, the photo still fresh in my mind. "Glad to hear it," I said. She kissed me on the cheek and went to bed, leaving me alone in the dark with my anger. I wasn't going to confront her yet. If Nicole thought she could lie her way through this, I was going to let her for now. But I was building my case, piece by piece, until there would be no escape. She thought she was untouchable. She was wrong. The next few days passed in a haze of careful observation and quiet anger. Nicole moved through the house as if nothing had changed, smiling her fake smiles, tossing out excuses like confetti. She was oblivious to the fact that her world was unraveling right under her feet. I wasn't going to tip my hand. Not yet. I needed more proof, more leverage, more ways to ensure she couldn't weasel her way out of this. She thought she had me fooled. She didn't realize she was the one being played. The GPS tracker became my closest ally. Each evening, as Nicole left the house with her rehearsed excuses, meeting Amanda, staying late at work, running errands, I tracked her movements. Her routine was as predictable as it was damning. The hotel downtown, a secluded cafe on the outskirts of town, a park with walking trails where she'd meet Ryan, their laughter floating through the air as they strolled hand in hand. I documented everything. Photos, timestamps, location logs. My phone became a gallery of betrayal, each image sharper than the last. I planted a voice recorder in her car. It was a risk, but one I was willing to take. The first few recordings were mundane. Music, phone calls with her mom, the sound of her humming along to the radio. Then came the conversation that made my blood boil. Ryan's voice, smooth and confident. "You looked incredible last night." Nicole's laugh, light and flirtatious. "You're so bad for me." Bad for her? I wanted to scream. What about me? What about our marriage, our life, the years I'd spent believing she was someone she clearly wasn't? But I swallowed my rage, focusing on the recording. "Ryan, when are you going to tell him?" "Nicole, tell Floyd? Why would I? He's too busy with work to even notice." Her laugh was sharp, cutting through me like a knife. It wasn't just betrayal. It was mockery. I found her email chain with Ryan, buried in a folder labeled miscellaneous. The messages were short but intimate, filled with details about their plans, inside jokes, and compliments that made me want to smash the screen. "Last night was amazing. You're all I think about. I miss you already. Let's get away this weekend, just the two of us." She responded with emojis, heart-shaped ones, and a photo of herself in a dress I didn't recognize. She hadn't bought it for me. Her spending habits, once casual, now painted a clearer picture. Dinner receipts for two at restaurants I'd never heard of. Boutique purchases that didn't align with her usual tastes. Hotel charges that coincided perfectly with her girls' nights. She was funding her double life with our money, and she didn't even have the decency to hide it properly. By the end of the week, I had everything I needed: photos, messages, recordings, bank statements. It wasn't just a collection of evidence. It was a weapon, sharp and precise, ready to cut through the lies she'd wrapped herself in. But I wasn't done yet. Nicole had spent months thinking she was smarter than me, thinking I wouldn't notice. I was going to make sure she felt every ounce of the betrayal she'd inflicted on me. That weekend, as she sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, I watched her from across the room. Her laughter was light, carefree, as if she hadn't turned our marriage into a farce. She thought she was untouchable. She thought she'd won. But the game wasn't over. It hadn't even started. Nicole had no idea what was coming. She went about her days with the same smug confidence, tossing out lies as though they were meaningless. I played along, nodding at her excuses, feigning interest in her fabricated stories about Amanda or work emergencies. But behind the scenes, I was orchestrating her downfall. It wasn't enough to gather evidence. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done, to watch her perfect little world collapse around her. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait. The first step was her social circle. Nicole thrived on appearances, carefully curating her image to ensure she always looked like the put-together, charming wife. Her friends were extensions of that facade, people she could impress and manipulate with ease. Using a burner phone, I sent an anonymous text to Amanda, her supposed best friend. I thought you should know the truth about Nicole. Check the attachments. I included photos of Nicole and Ryan at the hotel, laughing and holding hands, and screenshots of their messages. The fallout was immediate. Nicole came home the next day, slamming the door behind her. Her face was pale, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. Amanda won't answer my calls, she said, pacing the kitchen. She's acting weird. I shrugged, keeping my expression neutral. Maybe she's busy. Nicole shot me a glare, but didn't respond. Next, I targeted her reputation at work. Using the same burner phone, I sent an email to her boss, attaching the same evidence. One of your employees, Nicole Harper, has been engaging in inappropriate behavior during work hours. I thought you should know. Within days, Nicole came home fuming. They're doing a review of my work, she said, her voice sharp. Someone sent them photos, fake photos, claiming I've been unprofessional. I raised an eyebrow. That's ridiculous. Why would anyone do that? She stared at me, her jaw clenched, before storming out of the room. Ryan wasn't spared either. I found his wife on social media, scrolling through her public posts until I found a photo of her with Ryan and their kids, a picture-perfect family. I sent her the same message I'd sent Amanda, attaching the evidence. The voice recorder in Nicole's car captured the fallout. Ryan, my wife knows. She's threatening to leave. Nicole, calm down. She's not going to do anything. Ryan, how can you be so sure? Someone is watching us, Nicole. This isn't just going to blow over. Nicole, you're overreacting. But her voice wavered, and I could hear the cracks forming in her confidence. The financial blow came next. Nicole had always relied on me to manage our accounts, never bothering to check the details. She didn't notice when I moved half of our savings into a private account. She noticed when her credit card declined at a boutique. She came home in a panic, waving the card at me. Something's wrong with the account, she said, her voice frantic. Did you move money? I shook my head, pretending to be confused. I'll call the bank and check. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't press further. Piece by piece, her life was unraveling. Her friends were distancing themselves, her reputation at work was in jeopardy, and her lover was pulling away. The foundation she'd built her lies on was crumbling, and she was starting to notice. But she still didn't know I was the one behind it all. She thought she could lie her way out of anything. She was wrong. That night, as she sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, I watched her from across the room. She looked smaller somehow, her shoulders hunched, her movements hesitant. For the first time, she seemed unsure. But the game wasn't over. Not yet. Nicole was coming undone, and it was beautiful to watch. The lies she'd spent months carefully constructing were turning into a noose tightening around her neck. Every move she made, every excuse she muttered, felt like one step closer to the inevitable collapse. But she wasn't ready to admit defeat. Not yet. Her arrogance, the same trait that had fueled her betrayal, was now her undoing. She still believed she could control the narrative, manipulate her way out of the mess she'd created. She couldn't see the walls closing in. The fallout at work escalated quickly. Nicole came home one afternoon, slamming her bag onto the counter. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed red. "They're putting me on probation," she said, her voice trembling with barely concealed rage. "They said they're concerned about my professional conduct." "Can you believe that?" I nodded, feigning sympathy. "That's ridiculous," I said. "Do they have any proof?" Her jaw tightened, and she looked away. "No," she muttered. "It's all lies." But her voice wavered, and I could tell she was starting to doubt herself. Ryan, too, was slipping away from her. The voice recorder in her car captured their arguments, growing more frequent and heated. "You're acting like this is my fault," Ryan snapped during one exchange. "I told you this wasn't a good idea." "Oh, please," Nicole shot back, her tone dripping with disdain. "You were fine with it when it was convenient for you." "It's not convenient anymore," Ryan said. "My wife's talking about divorce." "I'm done, Nicole." Her response was a string of curses, followed by the sound of her slamming her hands on the steering wheel. The cracks in their affair were turning into chasms. Her social circle had all but abandoned her. Amanda and Katie, once her closest friends, had cut her off entirely. Nicole spent hours pacing the house, her phone in her hand, staring at messages that never got replies. "Everyone's acting so weird," she said one evening, her voice a mix of frustration and desperation. It's like they know something I don't." I shrugged, sipping my drink. "Maybe they're just busy," I said. Her glare was sharp, but she didn't respond. The final blow came with the finances. Nicole was used to a comfortable life, one funded by my hard work and her ability to spend without consequence. But now, her credit cards were declining, her favorite boutiques were off limits, and she couldn't ignore the growing cracks in her carefully curated facade. She confronted me one evening, her voice rising with each word. "Where is the money, Floyd?" she demanded, waving a bank statement in my face. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my expression calm. "I moved it," I said simply. Her jaw dropped, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You did what?" "I moved it," I repeated. "I'm protecting myself, Nicole. You should have thought about that before you started sneaking around." She stared at me, her face a mix of shock and rage. "You can't be serious," she said finally. "This is our money." "Was our money," I corrected. Her hands clenched into fists, but she didn't have a response. That night, she didn't sleep. I heard her pacing the bedroom, muttering under her breath, her phone lighting up intermittently as she sent frantic messages. She thought she still had a way out, a way to salvage what little was left of her web of lies. She was wrong. The trap was almost fully sprung. Nicole thought she could manipulate her way out of this, that she could twist the narrative to suit her needs. But she didn't realize the game was over, and I was about to deliver the final blow. Nicole's calm, polished exterior was gone. She moved through the house like a storm cloud, muttering to herself, her movements erratic. Her phone was glued to her hand, her once glowing confidence now replaced by paranoia. She knew something was wrong. She just didn't know how deep it ran. And that was the beauty of it. Nicole had spent months crafting lies, creating an illusion of control. Now, she was flailing, trying to hold on to the threads of a life she could no longer manipulate. Her job was the first domino to fall. I overheard the phone call from her boss, the voice on the other end firm but professional. "We've decided to terminate your employment, effective immediately," they said. Nicole tried to argue, her voice climbing in pitch, but it was clear there was no room for negotiation. When she hung up, she threw her phone across the room, the sound of it hitting the wall echoing through the house. "They fired me," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "Over lies. Can you believe that?" I kept my expression neutral, suppressing the urge to smile. "That's awful," I said. What are you going to do? She didn't answer, storming out of the room without another word. Ryan wasn't far behind. The voice recorder in her car captured their final conversation, their voices sharp and cutting. I can't do this anymore, Ryan said. Oh, grow up, Nicole snapped. You're just scared because your wife found out. Scared, he shot back. You're damn right I'm scared. This isn't just about me anymore, Nicole. Whoever's been watching us isn't going to stop. Nobody's watching, she hissed, but her voice wavered. You don't know that, he said, and I'm not sticking around to find out. The sound of a car door slamming and tires screeching followed. When Nicole came home that night, she looked like she'd been hit by a truck. She didn't say a word, heading straight to the bedroom and locking the door. Her social life was in shambles. The once endless stream of texts and calls from her friends had dried up completely. Amanda and Katie, her two closest allies, had blocked her on social media. Nicole spent hours scrolling through her phone, staring at unanswered messages and missed calls. Everyone's turned on me, she said one evening, her voice shaking. Even my friends are acting like I'm some kind of villain. I shrugged. Maybe they know something you don't, I said, my tone casual. Her eyes snapped to mine, suspicion flickering across her face. But she didn't ask the question I knew was on the tip of her tongue. The financial reality hit her harder than anything else. Her card declined at the grocery store, and when she checked the bank account, the balance was a fraction of what it used to be. Floyd, she said, her voice shaking, I need to know what's going on with the money. I looked at her, my face unreadable. It's all accounted for, I said. I moved it to make sure it was safe. Safe? She asked, her tone rising. Safe from what? From you, I said simply. Her face crumpled, and for the first time, she seemed genuinely afraid. That night, as she sat on the couch with her head in her hands, I stood in the doorway, watching her. Nicole Harper, the woman who once thought she could lie her way through anything, was crumbling before my eyes. She had no friends, no job, no lover, and no control. And she still didn't know I was the one who'd orchestrated it all. The trap was fully set. All I had to do now was spring it. Nicole was barely holding herself together. She spent her days pacing the house, her phone in hand, and her nights locked in the bedroom. She didn't bother with her usual excuses or lies anymore. She was too consumed by the mess her life had become. But she still didn't know who had pulled the strings. She hadn't figured out that the quiet, steady presence sitting across the dinner table from her was the very person who had unraveled her carefully curated life. That was about to change. I waited until she was out of the house. Her last refuge was the occasional drive to clear her head. I knew she wasn't meeting Ryan anymore. The voice recorder had confirmed that their affair was over. While she was gone, I set the stage. I placed the folder of evidence on the kitchen counter, the one containing every photo, text message, bank statement, and recording I collected. It was thick, damning, and impossible to ignore. Beside it, I left a single note scrawled in my handwriting. The truth always comes out. When she walked through the door, I was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee. She froze when she saw the folder, her eyes darting between it and me. What is this? She asked, her voice trembling. Why don't you take a look? I said, keeping my tone calm. She hesitated before stepping forward, her hands shaking as she opened the folder. Her face went pale as she flipped through the pages, her breathing growing faster with each photo, each screenshot, each piece of irrefutable proof. By the time she reached the end, she looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. You knew, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I knew, I confirmed. She collapsed into the chair across from me, the folder still clutched in her hands. Why didn't you say anything? She asked, her voice breaking. Because I wanted you to feel it, I said, my voice cold. Every lie, every betrayal, every ounce of what you've done to me. I wanted you to experience the consequences you thought you could avoid. She shook her head, her tears falling freely. I never meant for it to get this far, she said, her voice desperate. I was lonely, Floyd. You were always working, and I held up a hand, cutting her off. Don't you dare blame me for this, I said, my voice sharp. You made choices, Nicole. You lied, you cheated, and you destroyed everything we had. That's on you." For a long moment, she sat in silence, her head bowed. Then she looked up at me, her expression shifting. "What now?" she asked, her voice hollow. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. "Now, you face the consequences," I said. I slid a second envelope across the table, this one containing divorce papers. Her eyes widened as she picked it up, her hands trembling. "You're serious?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Dead serious," I replied. She didn't fight me. She didn't argue. Over the next week, she packed her things in silence, her once cutting remarks and manipulative charm reduced to nothing. When she stood by the door with her suitcases, she turned to me one last time. "Floyd," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry." I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. "Goodbye, Nicole." She hesitated, as if waiting for me to stop her, but I didn't. The door closed behind her, and for the first time in months, the house was quiet. The trap had sprung, and Nicole's carefully constructed life had crumbled. She thought she could lie her way through anything, but the truth had a way of catching up. Nicole was gone, and the house was silent in a way that felt unfamiliar at first. It wasn't oppressive or lonely. It was peaceful. I walked through the rooms, taking in the empty spaces where her things used to be, and felt nothing but relief. She had thought she was untouchable, that she could play her games and walk away unscathed. But now, her life was in pieces, and for the first time, I felt free. Her departure rippled through the social circle she had once thrived in. Mutual friends reached out to me, cautiously curious about what had happened. I kept my responses vague, not out of kindness, but because I didn't need to explain myself. Nicole's reputation was in shambles. Amanda and Katie, once her closest friends, had fully turned against her. The photos and messages I'd sent anonymously had made their rounds, and Nicole's name was now synonymous with betrayal. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she'd moved to a small apartment in another town, taking a job that was a far cry from the position she'd lost. She was starting over, but not in the way she'd planned. Her last attempt to contact me came as a voicemail, her voice shaky and tearful. "Floyd, I need to talk to you. Please. I know I messed up, but I still care about you. I don't know how to fix this, but I'm willing to try." I listened to it once, then deleted it without a second thought. Her words didn't matter anymore. With Nicole gone, I poured my energy into rebuilding my life. My construction business, once a source of stress, became my focus. I took on bigger projects, reconnecting with old clients and expanding my team. Each completed job felt like a step forward, a reminder that I was capable of creating something solid and lasting. The house, too, became a project. I repainted the walls, rearranged the furniture, and replaced the things she had picked out with items that felt like me. It was no longer a reminder of what I'd lost. It was a reflection of what I'd reclaimed. One afternoon, while organizing the garage, I came across a box of photos from our early years together. I sat on the concrete floor, flipping through them slowly. There were pictures of our wedding, vacations, holidays, all moments that had once felt so real. Now, they felt like artifacts from another life. I burned the box that evening in the backyard fire pit. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of closure. Life began to settle into a rhythm. The days were filled with work, the evenings with quiet moments on the porch or calls with friends I hadn't spoken to in years. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward. Nicole's chapter in my life was closed. Her betrayal had been a storm, but it had cleared the way for something better. The weight I had carried for months was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of freedom. And as I sat on the porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized something. I wasn't defined by what Nicole had done to me. I was defined by how I had risen above it. The quiet that followed Nicole's departure didn't just fill the house, it filled me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the constant pull of her lies, her manipulations, or the tension that had wrapped itself around our marriage like a noose. I was free, and with that freedom came clarity. The business thrived in ways I hadn't imagined. Without the distractions Nicole had brought into my life, I was able to focus entirely on growing what I had built. I hired a small team, expanded my client base, and even started exploring projects I'd always wanted to tackle but never had the bandwidth for. Every completed job felt like a victory, a reminder that I was capable of creating something real and meaningful. It wasn't just about making a living anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could stand on my own. The house became a sanctuary. I stripped it of every trace of Nicole. Her photos, her decorations, even the little trinkets she'd collected over the years, all gone. I replaced them with things that felt like me. Sturdy, practical furniture, muted colors, and a workshop in the garage that I finally had the space to organize. Each change felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The house no longer felt haunted by her presence. It felt like home. I started to reconnect with old friends, people I'd drifted away from during the years I'd spent wrapped up in Nicole's drama. One of them, Paul, invited me out for a beer one evening. We sat on the patio of a small bar, laughing over memories of high school and catching up on the years we'd missed. "So, what's next for you?" he asked, his tone casual but curious. I shrugged, smiling. "Not sure yet, but for the first time, I'm excited to figure it out." Nicole's name rarely came up anymore. Every now and then, someone would ask about her, their curiosity tinged with awkwardness. I kept my answers brief. "She's gone," I'd say. "That's all that matters." And it was. One afternoon, while working on a new project in the garage, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was from a woman named Rachel, a designer I'd met during one of my construction jobs. She'd always struck me as sharp, funny, and refreshingly straightforward. We'd exchanged numbers for work purposes, but her message wasn't about business. "Hey Floyd, I was wondering if you'd like to grab coffee sometime." No pressure, just thought it'd be nice to catch up. I stared at the screen for a moment, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Sure," I replied. "When and where?" Rachel and I met at a small cafe the following weekend. The conversation flowed easily, her laughter infectious. She didn't pry into my past or ask about Nicole. She was more interested in the present, in who I was now. For the first time, I felt a spark of something real. As I drove home that evening, I realized how far I'd come. Nicole's betrayal had once felt like the end of everything. But now, it was clear that it had been a beginning, a painful, necessary step toward a life I could truly call my own. And as I pulled into the driveway, the house lit warmly against the evening sky, I felt something I hadn't in years. Hope. Rachel and I met again and again after that. Each time, the connection felt stronger, more natural. She had a way of making me laugh, of reminding me that life could be light and uncomplicated, something I hadn't believed in for a long time. It wasn't a whirlwind romance or some dramatic transformation. It was steady, honest, and real. For the first time, I felt like I could let go of the past without fear of it catching up to me. Nicole's name surfaced less and less, fading into the background of my life like a ghost finally put to rest. The last real mention of her came from a mutual acquaintance I ran into at the hardware store. They asked how I was doing and, with a cautious glance, mentioned that Nicole had moved out of state. "She's trying to start fresh," they said. I smiled, nodding politely. "Good for her," I replied, and I meant it. It wasn't forgiveness. It was indifference. Rachel became a constant in my life, not as a replacement for what I'd lost, but as a partner in the life I was building. She encouraged me to take risks, to dream bigger, and to believe in myself in ways I hadn't before. Together, we expanded my business, bringing her design expertise into the fold. Clients loved the dynamic we brought to projects, and the work became more fulfilling than it had ever been. The house, too, transformed. With Rachel's help, it became more than just a space. It became a home. She added touches of color and warmth, things I hadn't thought I needed, but that made the space feel alive. It no longer reminded me of Nicole or the lies that had once filled its walls. It reminded me of how far I'd come. One evening, as Rachel and I sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, she turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "You've come a long way," she said softly. "Do you ever think about her?" I shook my head, smiling faintly. "Not really," I said. "She's part of the past, and that's where she belongs." Rachel nodded, her hand slipping into mine. I'm proud of you, Floyd. I squeezed her hand, the warmth of her words settling over me. Nicole's betrayal had once felt like the end of everything. But now, standing in the life I'd rebuilt from the ashes of her lies, I saw it for what it really was, a turning point. It had forced me to confront truths I'd ignored, to let go of illusions, and to rediscover who I was. And as Rachel leaned her head on my shoulder, the stars beginning to scatter across the sky, I realized something. The best revenge wasn't what I'd done to Nicole. The best revenge was the life I'd built without her. What are your thoughts on my story? Let me know in the comments what you think about my choice and how you might have dealt with it.